We are live?
Yes.
Namaste to everybody. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to you, Bharatji. I'm excited to have Dr. Bharat Gupt today with us to talk to us about a very interesting and yet controversial topic of one of our ancient texts called Manusmriti. So, Manusmriti is a text which is, I guess, the most talked about and the least read texts of the, Hindu Dharma. And, Sanjay Dikshitji, who is an IAS officer and runs, his own media channel, did a straw poll once, to see how many Hindus actually have the Manusmriti in their house. And out of about 1,000, people in his survey, most of them had the Ramayana. They had the Gita. Almost close to 95% of them had the Gita and the Ramayana, and the Hanuman Chalisa was the most available text in the household, and the next was Durga Saptashati. And how many households had the Manusmriti? 4 households. 4 out of 1,000, so not even 1% of the households had Manusmriti in their house, and all 4 households were incidentally Dalit households. So that brings me to the point that the neo-Ambedkars and the Dalit, the school of thought that has sort of emerged out of the Christian Dalit movement and the others, and the left movement, has basically maligned this text so much that when I actually started reading it before this session, I was amazed because it reminded me a little bit about the Rig Veda because of the cosmogony in it. And then it reminded me a little bit of the Gita. Those are some of the, texts that I have been following all my life. So what I'm trying to say here is that when the colonialist came into this country of India with a very, nefarious activity in mind, they were still trying to understand the society and were amazed and appalled to see that we did not have the 10 commandments or similar sort of a codified law system, and it was so diversified. And Manusmriti was one text that they found was being used for some of the legal discussions, I guess. But I am no expert on this topic. I have just started to explore it, and I would like to hand the floor over to Dr. Bharat Gupt. But before that, I want to just take a couple minutes to talk about his versatile personality. I basically also am amazed, Bharatji, at the your wide repertoire. First of all, you are a Delhi University Ex-Emeritus professor, and you have studied and traveled abroad quite a lot, especially from where I am right now in North America. And you are also a specialist in Hindu text, arts, and philosophy, a classicist, a theater theorist, sitar and surbahar player. We have to bring you in for something, related to art and musicology as well. And you're a cultural analyst, and also, of course, you write in newspapers. So I am so impressed by your versatile resume, and the fact that that's really interesting to note about you. And I'm so honored to have you today and have you tell us and educate us on this esoteric and interesting text called the Manusmriti. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar to everybody in North America and those in India also who have managed to wake up at this, or rather to continue keeping awake at this late hour. It's almost 11:15 here, and we are just beginning. Now, I shall begin, as is my habit, with an invocation, what is called a Mangala Charan, in praise of Shiva. Ganga Taranga Ramaniya Jata Kalapam. Ganga Taranga Ramaniya Jata Kalapam. Gauri Nirantar Vibhushita Vama Bhagam. Narayana Priyamananga Jatapaharam. Narayana Priyamananga Madapaharam. Varanasi Purapatim Bhaja Vishwanatham. So this was in praise of Shiva, who is the Lord of Varanasi, the great city of knowledge. And with this auspicious enunciation, we begin this conversation. I am very, very glad that Kohana is giving me an opportunity to talk to you and discuss something which is not just a matter of a topical interest, but is a matter of almost a, a big battle. It is a big battle actually now for Hindus living in North America. Now, I am not a person who is just far away in India because I have a long, long association with the United States, nearly a lifetime. My children are settled there now. So I am one of you. And whatever is felt by you, thought by you, is part of my thinking as well. Now, Manusmriti has become all of a sudden very important again, and particularly in North America, because we see a new discourse on racism which is being generated in North America. Now, that is one part of our study of Manusmriti because the left liberal or the cultural Marxists, as one may call them, they are using Manusmriti to construct their present day discourse on racism. So, therefore, we have to talk of Manusmriti in context of what people are thinking and what they are saying about Hindus, how they are classifying Hindus, defining Hindus, in our opinion, almost maligning Hindus. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is Manusmriti as an ancient text, which is one of a large number of what may be called in the English language as the moral codes or the law books of Hinduism. Manusmriti is undoubtedly the most important or one of the most important ones, but there is a very large body of them which governed the law in India, and India prospered by these laws. After all, India was a very prosperous nation for thousands of years. If it had not been so, then so many people would not have come and plundered and looted and colonized it. So there is hardly any point in trying to prove that Manusmriti caused a lot of prosperity, contrary to what is being projected now in India and even in Europe and America. So I will take these two things separately because my main concern today would not be to talk about the new theories of racism or wokeism, as it is now called in North America, and which affects Hindus very adversely, as I am seeing now for the last 5 years. Very unfortunate because Hindus are a very industrious and well meaning people who have contributed immensely to the material, cultural, and spiritual prosperity of North America. So they have to be seen in terms of what they merit and not in terms of what they are being forcibly defined as, not what they people are making Hindus to be pictured as. It's something entirely different. So, first, let me talk about, and perhaps you would share my views if I have got it right. that the present discourse is that there are three kinds of racism in the world. One is, of course, Hitler's Nazism. The other is the white supremacist discourse, which totally disregards the Black lives in America. And third is the Hindu discourse, where Hindu is the believer in the intrinsic hierarchy of mankind, especially the intrinsic hierarchy of human beings as they are in terms of a society and culture in India. So Hindu is a homo hierarchicus, as Dumézil once said, and they believe that there is no Hinduism without hierarchy, without somebody on the top and somebody on the bottom, and therefore Hinduism is a paradigm, an entire paradigm of oppression, that there is somebody on the top and largely people on the bottom who are being oppressed. So, this is what is being presented. Now, I don't have to go into the details or a demolition of this very dubious, highly politicized notion. I just want to make a few observations. My first observation is that this is entirely the guilt of those people who have done some deep historical wrongs in North America, which are historically recorded, and hardly there's anything to argue about it. Namely, the supremacy which the white colonizers attained, and uh, how they uh, committed more or less a genocide and wiped out civilizations and established themselves. So there is this deep guilt inside their minds, and which is being put forth to them by rest of the world, and they somehow want to lay this guilt on others. And Hindus are a very convenient people in North America onto whom you can lay this guilt. So you can always say that, oh, you are also one of those people who have done very seriously wrong things. And you have done it for a much longer time. You have a longer civilizational history of oppression. So if we happen to do it since, let us say, the 15th, 16th century for just 400 years, not more, merely 400 years as compared to your 4,000 years, then we are not so bad people. And we are now trying to show you the door and how to get rid of all this. And of course, there is Adolf Hitler, who was guilty of the same thing. So you see, it is entirely this discourse rooted in this kind of heavy guilt. Hindus, of course, are not part of that guilt. Indian civilization is not part of that guilt. This was not a system of oppression, but I shall talk about it when I come to Manusmriti proper within the context of India. Now, another observation that I would like to make is this, that there is no comparison between what may be called racism, because racism is a notion which originates actually, uh, it originates actually in Christianity, because Christianity believes in an intrinsic chain of being, that creation, creation as it has come about as a godly act and is there for everybody to see and live in, that itself is a hierarchy. So there is God at the top, then there are angels when you come down, then there are human beings, then birds, reptiles, and when you go down, then you have demons, and finally, at the last end, you have Lucifer, who was the brightest of the angels but who rebelled. but who now lives in the deepest circle of the hell. And in human beings also, there is a gradation. Some are intrinsically higher, born higher forever, because they would be like this forever. They are closer to God, they are closer to light, they are closer in complexion to God, because God, Christian God, uh, is supposedly a white God. So the white people are closer to God, and the black people are not so close. They are down the line, down the hierarchy. Now, I don't have to give you all kinds of evidence for this, because this is readily available as to what people were thinking, even as late as early 20th century, when they defined uh, in anthropological terms that people living in Africa and in other parts of the world, those who are once called Aborigines, are lower kinds of Homo sapiens. Now, it is primarily this prejudice which encouraged slavery, which justified slavery, and slavery of a slavery of this kind, where you capture people who have lost a war and sell them and make them slaves. This has been part of the European world ever since the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Arabs. It's not something which has been part of India. So it is an entirely different category, and that is historically established and well known. So, what is really the cause of this thinking about Homo hierarchicus does not apply to India, but it originates in Christianity, and it is applied. It was applied in Europe, in Asia and Africa through colonization, and Indians cannot be put in the same category. So, this is one thing. And I think Hindus should point this out now. It's high time that they should simply lay the facts on the table. And they should also point out that the idea of equality, liberty, and fraternity, as it has been propounded since Rousseau, is implemented in a very defective way in North America and Europe. Because what you call equality is still not really an equality which looks upon civilizations as equal. Practically speaking, people talk about bringing the black people up in the social sphere, giving them equal rights. But I hardly ever hear of reviving the original African culture and values and civilization of the African people, of the black people. So the Black Lives Matter, as it is defined now by the present wokist cabal, if I may say, but the black culture does not matter. And black culture is only just the culture of the people who came to America as slaves. But what about the culture of the people who lived in Africa and are still living in Africa, not in the cities of Africa, but outside? What about the culture of those people who are still living in South America? I mean, how much is there an effort to recognize, to allow that culture to flourish, to make that culture a part of the new multiculturalism? Not a bad idea. I approve multiculturalism, but it will be multicultural only if you have something more than what is defined by the white hand and what is arranged by the white hand as the salad bowl. If the salad bowl is going to be arranged only by the white hand, then you won't have those colors and cultures and fruits and nourishing things which belong to the African civilization or to the Aztec or to the Mayan. You see my point now? That this whole talk about equality and Black Lives Matters seriously lacks true multiculturalism. And it shows no intention of including that. As a matter of fact, it wants to keep that whole heritage of the black people or the brown or the yellow people out and give some kind of inequality, which is equality only in terms of the present day white society, whether of the right wing, the right Christian people, or Christianity centered people, or of the so called Marxist left or the cultural left, or the people who are thinking in terms of liberty, equality, and fraternity. They define fraternity in which there is hardly any room for any other culture. So, this is my critique, and I think Hindus now in America should start talking about it in very clear terms and start questioning as to how movements like Black Lives Matters can be meaningful unless they include the heritage of these people, which was pre slavery, which still exists in Africa and South America. Now, having made this observation and trying to, and having established that there is no similarity between the hierarchy or the diversity or the multiculturalism that we have had in India since very ancient times, as recorded in our earliest texts from the Rig Veda onwards, we have a very different kind of setup. So, first let us understand what is that kind of setup. Was there a hierarchy of the same order? Was it the same kind of hierarchy which believed that creation was done as a hierarchical thing, and creation was done in terms of color? Does Varna in India mean color only, or does it mean color at all? Let's try to understand this. Let's find out if it is so. Because now it's a cliche in the schools of Indology in the West, in America, North America, and Europe, that it only means, Varna means color. And so, color of the so called fairer people who were once imagined to be the Aryan people, people who came somewhere from South Russia, or they are still trying to discover where they came from, uh, and the people who were dark and who lived in India. Now, that is not either the historical truth nor the fact that we find in our texts, in the Indian text written not just in the Sanskrit language, but in all languages of India, in something like 30 major languages and another 150 or 200 dialects. So let me go about as to what is really the situation and what it has been, and what does Manusmriti talk about. Now, let me first begin by pointing out that Manusmriti is not just about the so called caste system. what has been called the caste system, but is actually better uh, defined in indigenous terms as Varna Vyavastha, as Varna, Varna Jati. Jati is the smaller unit, and Varna is a different kind of category. So that is not the only thing in Manusmriti. Manusmriti actually, let me just very briefly give you a run through, consists of 12 chapters, and it talks about these 12 things. And not only Manusmriti, but almost all the what may be called the Smritis, and what are called the Smritis, and what may be called the moral codes of India, they talk about pretty much the same thing, maybe in a slightly different order, but they talk about the same thing. So, Manusmriti, first of all, talks about creation. The first chapter is birth of the universe, Jagat Utpattihi. And it says that it came to be created. Who created it? How? That's a very intricate thing, and there are many other texts who talk about it. No time today to go into that. But it said that there was this great cosmic egg, and there were three worlds: the higher world, the middle world in which we lived, and the lower world. And then what was created right in the beginning was time and dharma, and the opposite of dharma, adharma. But the whole creation was categorized, was given a varna. Varna here means category. Was categorized according to the actions of the people. So when all creation was made, that creation was divided into animals and birds and this and that according to the activity. So those who fly becomes bird, those who slither on the ground, those who crawl and slither, they become reptiles. And then there are other categories, the fish and human beings. But this is all according to karma anusar, karma, according to action. So whatever category is created in not just human society, but in creation as a whole, is according to karma or action. Which being acts in what way? So the one who crawls is one kind of varna. One who flies is another kind of varna. One who walks is another kind of varna. And then, of course, Manusmriti says that there were clouds and elements, and then vegetation, and then the cycle of time. Manusmriti then comes to how is it that dharma is defined? Now, what does dharma mean? Dharma doesn't mean just religion or some religious belief, or that there's somebody above me who is more powerful than me. Like the Greeks said that as boys to wanton flies are we to gods, they kill us for their sport. So this is one idea of God. But dharma is not an idea of God. Dharma is that which sustains you. So the action, the activity, the proclivities, the tendencies that sustain people, that is called dharma. So there are people who would do business and they are sustained by business, who do commerce, who give and take, who deal. They are the business community, and there would be a varna called the Vaishya Varna, the people who study, who are leaders of thought would be the Brahmanas. The people who would protect would be the Kshatriyas, and people who would be able to repeat and work and sustain and produce. Those who would be able to generate wealth by production would be the Shudra. Shudra is not always the untouchable living somewhere far outside the pale of the town, and who is the person uh, who is to be denigrated and not touched. You see, that's a very acute image of Shudra, which has been created largely for political purposes. Then, Lakshan means sanskar also. Dharma means that you perform certain activities, certain rituals. And ritual doesn't mean only religious rituals, but ritual is an act done by mind, body, and speech in order to fulfill a desire, in order to pass from one stage of life to another stage, in order to go beyond what you have done and commit yourself to something greater and bigger and different. And then dharma is also proper action, action which does not harm others. And finally, dharma is pleasing oneself, not in a mean, sensuous way, but more in the sense of what is here called, the word used is atmatushti, that is placating or pleasing your own soul, your highest being. It's closer to what the Greeks call eudaimonia, continuous well-being. That is atmatushti, because one is happy. So that is dharma. Dharma is something which finally rests in enlightening and pleasing and satisfying deeply oneself. It is not in being aggressive. It is not in proselytizing or saving others, but it is in saving oneself, discovering oneself. Then Manusmriti talks about various social relations, like marriage, like kingship, like what are the different rules of marriage and who will marry how, and that. And then the most important chapter in Manusmriti is what is called Shauch, or purity. You see, purity and impurity has to be seen in a pre Christian term, because purity in Christian or Islamic terms only means obedience to the dictates of God as rendered before us by the prophet. That is, obedience is what is pure. The one who obeys the injunctions, one who obeys the commandment is the pure, one who doesn't is impure. That's not the Hindu way. That was not the ancient Greek way. Probably it was also not the ancient Chinese way. It meant that purity is something which is not either ritualistic or arbitrary, but is well tried in terms of what is helpful and what is healthy in the long run. So you eat certain things, you don't eat certain things, you touch certain things, you don't touch certain things. You do your earning in a way, you follow a moral code, and the highest purity is not causing pain to others and not earning a dishonest living. So Manusmriti says to earn an honest living by honest means is the highest kind of purity. It is higher than washing yourself and changing clothes or performing certain rituals. Now, Manusmriti also talks about dividing life in four stages. first quarter of your life, approximately, you must spend in learning. Learning at home, because in pre-industrial society, everywhere in the world, people learned the trade of their parents, the vocation of their parents, the guild they were born into. And then some people went in for what is today called higher education. In the ancient world, there was nothing like primary school or middle school or higher secondary school. No, you did all this at home and then you went to what is now called college. And then the second stage was when you had a family, when you procreated, when you raised able citizens, when you gave back to your society which had given you birth through your parents. So this was the Grihasthashram, and this was considered to be the highest of all four ashrams because it sustained all other ashramas or all other functions. After that, there was retirement into the forest or into the forest area or into a slightly distant place from home where you thought about the meaning of life, about what you had done, if there was something higher, if there was an entity that governed us. In other words, you talked about philosophical things, about God, etc. And if you went very deeply into it, into yoga, into practice, then the last stage was sannyas. Now, what I want to point out here is that in one quarter of your life, in your grihasthashram, you sustained the students, you sustained those who have retired, those who are artists, poets, those who are philosophers, seekers. Manusmriti and ancient Hindu India was a place where people were using their wealth freely and compulsorily. Note this word, compulsorily. Here, dharma means you must do this in order to provide education to the young and to elderly and provide space for those who wanted to think, meditate, create art, write books. So it was a society where you didn't have to take a loan for your education. It was a society where you didn't have to depend on the state, on a welfare state. You didn't have to depend upon the government and fight a long battle with Obamacare or any other care given by another president or somebody. The welfare state we know has failed. Whether a communist state or a capitalist state, it has failed in the modern world. According to the ancient system, and in India, the Hindu system defined it very well, that it is the earner, the one who earns, the one who generates wealth. He is going to provide all the means to the other three categories. I am not saying that this utopia was 100% success, but I do claim, and sometimes certain wokes and Marxist liberals in America have been very displeased with me for saying this. India practiced this more than 50%. It practiced it more than it was practiced anywhere else in this world. Otherwise, India would not have produced such a huge amount of art, such massive quantities of literary, philosophical, ritualistic, artistic works, texts. You see the millions and millions of manuscripts which still survive after a huge amount of plundering and burning. They are evidence to this fact that out of the four ashramas, the Grihastha ashrami was really providing. Those who earned, they provided. Then Manusmriti also considers what a king should do, how he should govern. Manusmriti is a text which says you should never take prisoners of war. There were no war slaves in India. There were slaves, there were certain kinds of slaves, those who became slaves because they had taken a loan and several other things, but there were no war slaves, or women were not abducted and taken back home by the conquerors. This is something which shocked India when the Muslims came and did it. Then there is a whole section in Manusmriti on practice of law. There are many things that can be said. One important thing I'll say is that that it was not an expensive process because you didn't have to hire lawyers. There were no lawyers in ancient India. There were no pleaders. The system of pleaders and lawyers is a Greek system. In India, you only came and made your submission before the judge, and then you ask the evidence to be provided by the people who had seen. You see the witnesses. You produce the witnesses, and wrong witness was heavily punished in ancient India. I think if the modern Indian courts start punishing those who provide false witness, those who commit perjury in court, then something like more than half the litigations in India would vanish. It's a perversion of the Western system which is causing so much harm. Manu's system or system in ancient India was safe from that. Then there is a chapter on relationship between men and women, who will inherit what, and don't be under the illusion that women never inherited anything, they didn't have any special property or their own property since childhood. It was all there. And finally, there is a chapter on what is the best kind of conduct, the 11th chapter. And the 12th chapter is a philosophic chapter which says that, okay, you have seen the laws, you have seen the way of the world. Now you decide what is good for you, what is Shubha. How do you spiritually elevate yourself? Now, Manusmriti is all this. We don't talk about those wonderful things which were practiced in ancient India, which made India a very prosperous, efficient culture. We only talk about the Varna hierarchy, and we think that this hierarchy was very pernicious. Now, let me come to the Varna. You see, Varna was divided, number one, into four categories: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and you all know the meaning in it. And then there were so many guilds called jatis. That is, people who performed different kinds of trades, not just within the mechanics and within those who performed, those who were sculptors or artists of the mechanical order, but there were categories and jatis in every field. So there was jatis among Brahmins, that those who would do certain kinds of things, perform only the Vedic ritual, would be the Naishthik Vedic Brahmana. But those who perform certain other kinds of studies would be another kind of Brahmin. Those Brahmins who were not very brilliant, they were made into cooks and they would serve as cooks, and their social status would be as cooks. Similarly, the category or the jatis into whom people were born, they were guilds. And this was the Varna Jati system, which was primarily an economic order. Yes, there was a hierarchy in it, But at the level of social organization, there can be no society. There is, excuse me, there is no society even today which does not have hierarchy. But there is a difference between an Ivy League school and a community college. Do I have to repeat that? Everybody knows, everybody practices. You have accreditation councils and bodies. What else is that? So, what are you pretending to tell that everybody is equal? Everybody is not equal in every sense. Equality is not sameness. There is a diversity of merit, diversity of ability, and that creates a certain kind of hierarchy. And it also creates certain problems of power, that those who are at the higher end become manipulative. So, this kind of a drawback existed in the ancient Indian society also, in the same way as it exists today in British or American or German society. There's not much difference. So, the four Varnas, Brahma, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, were broad categories of activities. Those who were involved in learning, maintenance of knowledge, reproduction of higher knowledge, they would be the Brahmins. Those who would protect, govern, administer would be the Kshatriya. Those who would do economic trade or who would do pursuit of that kind would be the Vaishya. And those who would generate and produce in all kinds of guilds, they were Shudras. Yes, there were categories of people who were outcasts because they had been punished that way, or maybe that they were very unfortunate, or maybe that they had fallen a victim to certain diseases. Then they were asked to live outside the town sometimes, and Chandal was one such category. But all Shudras were not Chandal, as is projected by the so called Dalit literature in India or elsewhere. So you see this whole system, which was largely an economic system. Now, the first question, could you follow a profession which was different from one you were born into? Yes. And there are dozens of examples. There have been huge studies on it. 30 years ago, there was a gentleman called M.N. Srinivas who wrote several volumes, did research to prove that there was upward mobility and downward mobility both between the Varnas. So let's say if you were a governor of a place, if you were a Kshatriya, and you lost a battle, or you lost your kingdom, or you lost your fiefdom, then if you took to trading or commerce, then you would come down in the Varna category. And there were several examples. Or you, if you became a highly proficient intellectual or a poet or a philosopher, then you would rise to the category of a Brahmin. If you became an absolute dissolute, then you would be relegated to the behavior to the category of a Shudra. Now, one thing is to be understood, as I said right in the beginning, that creation was not in hierarchy. Now, that's one of the biggest mistake of, and mispropaganda about Indian texts. The Indian text says that everybody was created from Brahma, that is the supreme reality, and therefore was Brahmana. Everybody was therefore a Brahmana. You see, this is what is said. It's said in Mahabharata, it is said in Manu, right? In the first chapter, Manu said, and then, according to their economic professions, they fell into the category of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. And this was something open to upward and downward mobility, as community mobility, and as individual mobility. So there were several cases we find in texts, in dramas, in poetry, in various stories, where you have these characters and you see them and you learn about them and you see that they would be practicing certain activities which they inherited from the time of their birth, but certain new activities when they adopt a new profession and a new category or a new varna. For instance, there is this the hero in the play Mritchakatika, the clay cart. He is a Brahmin by birth, but he becomes a transporter. You know, he has carts which he rents out, and so he is a businessman. And now that he is businessman, so he can go and visit courtesans, and he falls in love with one of them, and she falls deeply in love with him. And then they said that, okay, we love each other so much, so I want to marry you. And the king says, okay, you can marry her. And she ceases to be a courtesan and she becomes a housewife along with the earlier housewife. So there was this mobility, this change, this, uh, what shall I say, this change from one space to another space. All this happened. And there are hundreds of examples of this. So the so called caste system was not rigid. Now, obviously, everybody did not want to change, just as today everybody does not want to change. Even today, we find that son of a lawyer, a successful lawyer, would inherit his father's practice, or a doctor. I mean, people go into that kind of things even today. So, in ancient times, also, the large number of people would stick to the profession of their parents, but there was mobility for those who wanted to change, and that is something happening even now. So, if I were to give you examples from text, from social order, from various other venues, it would take hours and hours. You can hear my videos. I have a couple hundred videos on my YouTube channel, and quite a few of them where I have discussed Manusmriti or the social order, you will see. Now, one last thing I will say, and this is something nobody talks about, especially all our fixated friends, you know, those who are politically fixated on Manusmriti, whether in India or in uh, or in California or somewhere, Colorado, where once you used to have this head office of the or Dalit organization. And it is this, that while there was what may be called the Shastrik or the Shastriya or the well defined system or the legal system uh, as enshrined in the Smritis, Manusmriti, Yagyaval Smriti, Deval Smriti, various other Smritis, and the Sutras, Apastam, etc., earlier. Apart from this, there was another category of what was called customary practice, lok achar. So, what is written in the books is shastra achar, shastrachar. But what was practiced in different parts of India, in different regions, was lok achar. So, like in Tamil Nadu, you could marry your your mother's brother. It was legal to do so. It's still done in villages in Tamil Nadu. And that was customary, regional custom. Now that was honored as much as what was supposedly defined by the Brahmins. So Lokachar was practiced and Lokachar was reconciled. It was on the basis of Lokachar that Draupadi had 5 husbands, not on the basis of Manusmriti or Yagyavalk or any other Smriti text, but on the basis of a local practice. So people who belong to a different region would also sometimes adopt the custom of another region. So Lokachar was very important. Similarly, laws had very uh, human and flexible parameters. It was not the strict law. It was not the law based on sameness. I don't have time. It was a different principle which was adopted in ancient time, where appropriateness of punishment was more important than the written letter. So I would stop here now, end my discourse. Thank you all for listening very attentively. And Richa would begin by questions, and I think hand it over to others who would like to ask questions. I'm all yours, and I have all the time to discuss these matters with you.
Thank you, Bharatji. That was amazing to understand the least known text for us. Really, it is because along with this, I think we always thank everybody, and I want to thank these neo-Ambedkarites for exposing us to this text because the more I learn about the Indian society, the Hindu society in the past, it is so based on dharma, on the pursuit of excellence within the jati guilds, as you call them. And also the social structure, is largely based on the economics. It was based on the economics. The society, is based on dharma. The legal system, like you said, is so diversified and went down to the grassroots level and allowed that democracy within that process to flourish, which is why we are the country that we are today, with the level of diversity that still exists in every element, even though there has been so much imposition of the colonial constitutional structure. Which sort of is a good segue for me to go to the first question. I think Mr. Vasuki here has asked that he has read that the Manusmriti was actually the constitution of that time, before the colonialists came in. So is that true? So maybe I'll have you answer that question.
Yeah, constitution is a modern term, and constitution is a set of laws made by a parliament, made by a chosen set of people, people who run the government. So in modern times, it's some kind of a state, whether a democratic state or a semi-democratic state or a communist state, that runs the government and that makes the laws. Now, let me tell you, whether you like to believe it or not, the Kshatriyas or the ruling classes or the kings, they did not make the laws. They did not say, you see, this whole struggle which you have in Europe, that the church used to have its clergy that made the laws, and it had its army, because Christ was the spiritual and the temporal Lord both. He was the one who would take care of your soul and bring it back to God, because if you repent, and he was the one who was also the temporal king, and he would govern through the church. This is the Christian model which Islam also inherited later on. Islam, in fact, replicated that model. Muhammad replicated that model. Now, this was not the case in India, and the struggle continued in Europe in medieval and modern time. Finally, when all powers were taken away from church, and then given to the so-called parliament, which was called secular, and therefore secular government. But in India, the governments, the ruling class, the Kshatriyas did not make the laws. They did not write the Smritis. Who wrote the Smritis? Smritis were collection of certain practices which existed. And it was not all Brahmins who were collecting them. Manu was supposedly a king. He only made recensions, he collected different practices. It was not only prescriptive, it was also descriptive. Similarly, the Brahmins also did not manufacture them, they only categorized them. There is a difference between reinstating and categorizing and giving them as commandments. So there was no central authority which said, this is what you would do, this is how you would marry, this is how you would inherit property, this is how you would perform your last rites. All these practices happened in different parts of India and they were categorized and people were described accordingly. So it
Right.
was therefore this multiculturalism in practice all the time.
Absolutely. The central element of the dharmic society is decentralism, from what I have understood, whatever I have read. And
Yeah.
when you describe the legal system in existence, to me, that's just is the core of it, where people at a local level were able to decide the diktats, the rules, the way the
Yeah.
society should function, right? And I've also seen, like you said, the kings had to go through a democratic process of selection sometimes. If the elder king was not able, the younger king was to take over. So basically, I have read from some of the Mewar kings, but I don't want to digress. I have a bunch of questions from people, and of course, the narrative of the neo-Ambedkarites is definitely going to play into this whole discussion, because one is that yesterday we had a session on just the gay pride and the just of on homosexuality being, and one of the points that was brought up was that couple of quotes that our own Kohna member Aldrin Deepakji, who is also very well versed in some of our texts, he quoted some of the verses out of Manusmriti and showed that there was absolutely no indictment against homosexuality was taken as run of the mill, that it is, yes, there are people who have who have a different sexual orientation. So my question to you is not about homosexuality, but about the from one of the questions that has been posed is about just the fact that despite all of these liberal quotes that I have read on women, on homosexuality, on even the construction of creationism, like you mentioned, that Brahman, we all are part of the bigger Brahma, right? So whether it's a Shudra, whether it's a Brahman, we are all part of that evolutionary process, but we are born of Brahma. So, but yet, were there manipulations of the text? That was one of the points discussed yesterday. And some of the scholars have mentioned that there have been manipulations of even the Guru Granth Sahib. I've discussed with Sikhs, and also of the Manusmriti, which was taken as one of the texts to be, just focused on by the Christian groups and by others, the Ambedkarites. So was the first of all, were there manipulations, and what do you think of the fact that there are some verses in Manusmriti about Shudra and women which are like very derogatory, so to speak, and there has been this whole process of Manusmriti burning that is ongoing, starting with Ambedkar leading the pack. So please, I would like you to weigh in on this. Thank you.
Uh, we have to broadly see the whole thing in historical terms. There was a society before industrial revolution in the world here, whether in Europe or in India or China or elsewhere. And there is a society which is after industrial revolution. So many things change. The whole economic order of the world changes with industrialization. Then, of course, with print culture coming in, then digitization coming in, but then television coming in, then digitization coming in. So we have a very different socio-economic order now. And the needs of the new order were not the needs of the old order, practically speaking. Sometimes, or not sometimes, always and always, the older texts, even the texts of Christianity, Quran, or the Indian texts, the Hindu texts, they are castigated for one thing. Why were women compelled to marry so early? Okay? Why did you not educate them? Why did women not go to college? So you'll have all kinds of vituperations on Manusmriti that women were not given higher education, women were not given any education, they were not given initiation, they were not sent to gurukulas, etc. And then on the other side, you will have apologists who would say, yes, they were. Now, the truth is different. The truth is that everywhere in the world, women had to start reproducing very early. You see, you had to reproduce 10 to 12 children so that 4 or 5 could survive and so that your race could continue. And if you send women out of home to educate themselves, and if they were to come back at the age of 30, they won't be able to give more than 1 or 2 child. And that would have meant depletion of total populations. And this would have been true, this was true not only of India, but Europe, Greece, or anywhere else. So all of these societies, they said, let's start reproduction early. Now you have to understand this. This is a very basic, fundamental fact. That next question, what about education? Yes, women were educated at home. Women were educated, given plenty of good education in India. If you want to read how and what and who would educate them, who would teach them, what were the resources, what was the social order, read Kama Sutra. Please see my lectures on Kama Sutra on my YouTube channel. There are details that I have given there, quotations I have given there as to how this happened. And Kama Sutra makes it very clear that women will be educated after marriage by the husband, before marriage by the father, after marriage by the husband. Kama Sutra says it in black and white, tells you how to. So I have given one example. Now, if you ask me, did they go to college? Well, I'll say, no, they didn't go to college because they could not have gone to college. And I can tell you, everybody will stop going to college in 10 years, even in North America, because the colleges and the university are becoming slowly and slowly defunct. They are not delivering the same education as they did. And I have seen this. I went to college in America, and I have been coming and teaching and lecturing for the last 35 years, and I've seen the massive decline and how difficult it is for people to go to college.
I think student debt is the biggest problem of this country at this time, one of the biggest, So you are so right.
So now there is shooting in your schools, and there is killing in your colleges. There are all kinds of riots in your colleges. And you still pretend that this is a workable liberal system. So I am not defending the ancient societies because there's nothing to defend. They worked out their systems, which were very different from ours. Let's not impose and demand our preferences from the ancient society. You just see if opportunity was provided or not. Yes, opportunity was provided. Read the Kama Sutra about women. Read the Kama Sutra about homosexuality. Read the Kama Sutra about gender. Read the Kama Sutra about men and women relationships and how sexuality was based on the principle of mutual respect and pleasure. Mutual respect and pleasure, and equality of the sexes, which does not mean sameness of work. Modern societies tend to take sameness of work as a mark of equality, which is not the case.
Absolutely.
So,
That's beautifully said.
now I can give you many such examples from Manusmriti where it would appear uh, extremely oppressive to you because certain things were not done or not allowed, or certain compulsions were there. For instance, do you know now people are endlessly castigating Brahmins and imagining that they were the ones who had the position of greatest authority and power. But this is not true. Brahmins depended upon alms, they depended on charity, and they were also compelled by law, by dharma, to live a life of utter simplicity. Today, you paint a picture as if a Brahmin was somebody who had stashed away millions somewhere hidden and who was, sitting pretending to be an austere person, but who had stashed away a huge amount of cash. Now, all this is all this is nothing but political vituperation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the
There were
way they
all
have
kinds of
portrayed.
Brahmins, all
Mhm.
categories of Brahmins,
Right.
and there were cases in which Brahmins had to be punished many more times than even a Shudra. Therefore, certain offenses.
When you mention the Kama Sutra, one of the things that always comes to my mind is that we never had one text or one book to go to. We have a multiple range of books. And when I started to read the Manusmriti, one of the things, there is such a common thread of philosophical and dharmic, sentience in the whole text and libraries that we have. So that is, and the fact that you mentioned about Brahmins, that they had to give up certain material wealth in
Yeah,
order to achieve that. So the process of evolution did not rest. The money actually rested largely with the Shudra and the Vaishya community. They were
yeah,
the trade guilds and the
right.
business
And the Kshatriyas
class.
also. And the Kshatriyas also. The wealth accumulated with Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the Shudras. And in Kshatriyas certainly had more wealth than anybody else because they were the rulers and the kings. They
Correct.
certainly had more wealth and splendor and lavishness. But Brahmins, they lived a life of great austerity or poverty.
Right. Absolutely. And, one of the points that you mentioned in the modern society, we are, currently in the US, the socialistic, framework that is coming up where, equal opportunity, like you said, does not mean equal outcomes. Or then there's always going to be a certain hierarchy that will prevail in the society because of the way some people excel and some may not, even despite the
You know,
opportunity.
I may point out here that in India, there was always and always an opportunity provided to the meritorious.
Yes.
And people from the lowest caste, they were able to push their way to the highest status of a guru or a saint or a poet or somebody with high standing because of their intellectual or spiritual worth. And it is true even today. You must have heard of, the hugging amma or the
Uh-huh.
hugging mother, right? Now
Fisherwoman.
she's a woman. She is a shudra. She belongs to one of the lowest castes, but she is not considered any less a saint than a saint who may have been Brahmin in his earlier life. You see,
Yeah.
I'm giving you an example which is from current practice. And I am witness to her spiritual power because I have myself felt the power of her spiritual embrace. So millions of people have given her that highest status. And this is just one example. There are dozens and dozens of examples.
Dozens of examples, and the writers, authors of Mahabharata and Ramayana are what we quote all the time. We've always had Valmiki and Vedas, and so basically, I think we have a couple more questions, Bharatji. I think before that, I just want to say that you brought out a very important point, that our society was based on the idea of evolution and reaching that highest, level of being Brahman or God, yourself. So we were always that liberal society that, and a quest was always present. I think it's a beautiful structure in general. The more we explore, the more we learn. But I think there were many other smritis. I have heard you talk about that. I think that is something I just wanted you to touch upon based on one of the questions I asked here. And also a question that is asked is probably a good link here is, could you please recommend a good translation of the Manusmriti, which we can read?
Well, look, a fairly good translation is a very, very old translation by Bueller into English. Then there are several translations in Hindi and Marathi and other languages. And I would recommend that if you read an Indian language, then you find a translation in the language you are more comfortable with, Tamil, Marathi, Bangla, or whatever. For those who want to read English, there is Bueller, then there is a translation by Kale, and
Pali. Can I take
several
the
others.
spelling of Bueller, because I guess we are not so familiar?
Bueller is regular German spelling, Buhler, Bueller. So I don't know what was the Christian name, but this is Bueller.
It's a
Yeah,
German guy.
yeah, it's available on the net. You just have to download it. If anybody writes me an email, I can send it to them. And then there are translations, uh, of course, into Hindi, etc. I don't use any translations, so I'm not familiar with them. But you can find them. And you see, regarding other smritis, yes, there are certain differences somewhere in certain matters. But as I said, that in India, diversity of law was the norm.
Yes.
You see, it was the norm. First of all, you had this biggest diversity: written law, shastrachar; unwritten law, customary law. Most people don't want to talk about it. Most people think that everything in India went according to written law. No, most of the things went according to customary law. And it's some regions of India that's still happening.
Right.
If Draupadi had 5 husbands as early as Mahabharat, which was, well, 5,000, 6,000, whatever years ago, you still have that custom in Himachal Pradesh today. You still have some villages which follow their system, where one woman marries a household of 3 brothers or 4 brothers. And it's not a libertine society. I mean, it may appear to us as something terrible just because it's unfamiliar, but it's a very well, highly structured society. Last week in the Northeast, in a family, the head of the family died. He had 86 children and 32 wives. Now, this is a custom which was followed in this far remote place in Northeast, which belongs to some ancient customs of that region. Hindu society never persecuted this kind of diversity. I mean, most of this persecution has either a Christian or an Islamic origin. It's time to call off this bluff, please.
Absolutely. You said it, sir. This is the statement of the day. It's time to call up this bluff. Because, just because they have the microphone and we don't, they have been just blasting this whole narrative of, swastika. Today, we are also facing these kind of laws. Swastika is a Nazi symbol,
I mean,
our holiest symbol. And
who
then the
created,
Dalit was, yeah.
who
I'm sorry.
created the problem regarding homoerotic people? The Christians. You
Yes.
see, the Greeks had a society in which homoerotic love was normal, an everyday affair. Now, when the Christians took over that society, just as they broke the Greek temples, just as they plundered their gods and statues and paintings, similarly, they plundered their social systems. And so they said homosexuality is horrible, it is demonic, it is the curse of Sodom and Gomorrah and all that. So they are the ones who brought in this.
Absolutely, and they don't get judged for having, there was slavery in that society. We never get up and say, look,
And now,
we don't
and
judge
now
the
they are
Christian
trying
code
to wash off.
by those
Now they're
ancient
trying
Middle
to wash
Ages.
off their guilt. Now they're trying to wash off their guilt and teach everybody else that you also do it. Well, why should I do it? I never did it in the past. When somebody from a Christian origin comes around and tells me that, look, you are anti-homoerotic, then I always say neither me nor my ancestors were any time anti-homoerotic. We have
Absolutely.
always believed in the naturalness of uh, diversity of gender. You see,
Mhm. So I
I
have one last question from the audience,
yeah,
Bharatji, because we may be running out of time. Manusmriti is part of the atrocity literature fed to the, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and Dalit groups by the conversion ecosystem.
yeah.
So how do you counter this narrative? And what is the way for us, forward? How do we build our own narrative around, we need some points, right? So
Yeah.
how do we do that? Like maybe
First,
3 or 4 points. Mhm.
the first is to have a historic perception. What is the history of Christianity? What is the history of Islam? What do the present governments in different parts of the world and the people and the states inherit, either from Christianity or from Islam? Before they preach tolerance, before they preach equality to Hindus. You see, you have to show them the mirror. You have to tell them that it is possible to take up practices of medieval or ancient times belonging to Islam and Christianity and prepare a list of counter atrocities. And we can go on spending our time. I mean, I can pick up the Bible and say that, look, it was legal to sell your daughter, the Bible says so. It was legal to stone somebody if he was homoerotic. I can discover 10 times atrocious things in the Bible or in the Quran than in Manusmriti. Now, if we continue to just, do this, then all we do is atrocity versus atrocity. My atrocity is not so bad, your atrocity is much worse. So I think it is time to come out of all this past and to start thinking about future and say something very simply that, look, if we are going to use something from the past, then let us use the good things. And the good things we find a lot in Manusmriti, in ancient Hindu practices. Ancient Indian society was a multicultural society. It was a society which had different social classes. You see, ancient European society, Greek society, Islamic society, they had either the ruling class or the ruled. Europe had feudal lords or the serfs. The Greeks had only the aristos, the aristocracy, those who belonged on the top, and the helots and the slaves. There was no middle class. Middle class is only 300 years old in Europe. Whereas in India, middle class is thousands of years old. It is, and that's why we had diversity. Then India has had people which have been accommodated, which have been absorbed for the very simple reason that the tenets of Dharma are accommodated. So let us see what are the tenets of behavior. And when we talk about tenets of behavior, and when we do a comparative study of religion, then you will find that the biggest obstacle with the Christian and the Islamic and the Abrahamic religion is that they preach that theirs is the only truth and theirs is the only true religion and the true God. Now, that's one of the biggest hurdles in way of multiculturalism. That is one of the biggest hurdles in way of a diverse or a pluralistic society. And if you want to create a pluralistic society, Manusmriti is any day a better book than Bible. Any day it's a better book than Bible. Because Manusmriti does not ask you to go and save the souls of others. But Christ did that, or at least that's how Christians interpret, In Matthews, he says, go and proselytize. In Mark, he doesn't say, go and proselytize. So, I mean, you have to see things historically and in present day practice. The biggest centers of proselytization in the world today are still located in United States of America. You have Project Thessalonica, you have the Joshua Project, and they're spending millions and millions on it. Why? What equality can you talk about? So I think we have to show them the mirror. Why are you doing it? Why are you spending millions and trillions on Joshua Project, on Project Thessalonica to save Hindu souls to call Hindus as unreached people. But these are very simple facts. If you believe in equality of human beings, then you have to start here. You have to start, first of all, in spiritual equality, that all human beings, if they are part of Godhead, if they are part of one totality, then you can talk of other kinds of equality. But if God is out there and human beings are different from God, and human beings are in different categories, like angels and humans and demons and Lucifer, if they are in a hierarchy, if creation is hierarchical, what do you talk of equality? They can be they can be operative hierarchy, just as you need in an army or in an office that somebody is going to lead and somebody is going to obey. But intrinsically, all human beings are equal. So let Christianity concede that first. Let Islam concede that first.
Absolutely. So because, it's not just Christianity. At this time, when we have the caste, Dalit, and this Manusmriti narrative going on in California, it is being driven by some Christian groups who call themselves Dalit Christians, but also, like you said, Islamic, groups as well. And also, we've had some Sikh people also coming up and talking about the Dalit narrative. So really, it's a multi-pronged and diverse group
The
that
Dalit,
is coming
the
together with this
The
narrative.
Sikhs have different gurdwaras for Dalits. In
Yeah.
India, you can go and see that the Sikhs don't practice what they are trying to tell you in California.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The deras of Dalits in Punjab are different, and the gurdwaras of the upper caste Sikhs are different. And today it is the upper caste also who are Sikhs who are falling to Christian conversion more than anybody else. So
Absolutely. This is, that's
you have
phenomenal.
to see this reality, and I think you'll have to point this reality out to the people. That
The
why do
turban
you do
and
it if you believe in equality, if you believe in plurality, if you
yeah.
believe in the proper message?
Absolutely. So, Bharatji, I think this has been very enlightening for us. And I think we have also learned some pointers. I'm sure we'll have more discourses like this from you to get more understanding. And like you mentioned, that Purva Paksha, we don't understand how their society was structured. Now they take us back to the Middle Ages, to ancient times, where I think we are only discovering that the narrative is worse than what really existed on the ground. Dharmic society is probably going to be an important path forward, to help us understand how to lead a spiritual, sustainable, more egalitarian
You see,
lifestyle in the future.
it's, it's a proven fact that Hindus are the most cooperative people as diaspora, wherever they have settled. They have contributed with no friction at all to the societies that have adopted them. And there is always a problem with Muslims who sooner or later demand Sharia law, who demand an entirely different space for themselves. There
Yes.
is always a problem between Christian factions who use different churches to pray. You see, it's a very simple fact you can tell all these people. I may be follower of Shiva, but I can go to a Vaishnav temple or a Devi temple. A Hindu who may be part of a certain sampradaya. He can go to worship any temple and worship any god. But a Unitarian will go to Unitarian church. A Presbyterian will go to Presbyterian church. Right? So their denominations are mutually exclusive,
Right.
which is not the case with Hindus. A South Indian worshipper of Devi is most welcome and does enter a North Indian temple of Shiva and does his puja as if he is doing it at home. So there is something which is far more deeply unifying at the philosophic level, and which is the most valuable portion of Hinduism, which the Christians and the Muslims in Europe and America have to concede and have to respect.
Absolutely. Their enlightenment movements and their transcendentalism movements in the US were all based on our Vedas and Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, So that is the inspiration we need to take. A lot of the movements that diversity and inclusion movement cannot go forward without the influence of a dharmic society. And we as Hindus really have that opportunity and that moment of liberation to understand ourselves better, decolonize, and take this forward. With this, I want to end this really nice discussion, Bharatji, and maybe go forward on the path of Dharma and understanding ourselves better. Thank you so much. Namaste to everybody. Thank you for sharing a beautiful Sunday morning with us, afternoon somewhere, and for you, very late in the night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've begun a new day.
Absolutely. So namaste.
Namaste.
Good night.